Hello, ladies and gentlemen, my name's StepsBasic and welcome back to my community show. Oh yeah. I can't do death metal very well. I try. I don't know those wolves, but I just no good at that. It's just terrible. Anyway, that's not what's important. What's important is our topic for today. Today, we're going to be talking about the broad brush. Yes, the blanket statement. Now, yes, I know. This is a very dangerous topic to talk about because it really goes border on political stuff. But we're not gonna brush up on political stuff. We're gonna kind of avoid all that because that's what we do here. We're here to talk about fun stuff and gaming and whatnot, and have fun with it. But as gamers, we are often painted with a very broad brush. When I was a kid, if you were a gamer, you were a nerd, you were a geek, you were a social outcast, you were persons that were just kind of icky and smelly and fat and hairy. Granted, I grew up to be pretty fat and hairy, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. But even as such, we as gamers do tend to paint with broad brushes as well. I'm not talking about, people in general. I'm talking about games in general. And this is a pitfall, really, when it comes to our own experiences and our likes and our dislikes and whatnot. And in some cases, you can accept the broad brush statement of, i.e., adventure games are just interactive movies and they're not really games. Or mobile games are for casual players, not for your hardcore gamers. And these are somewhat acceptable broad brushes, I guess. But in that same case as not all gamers look like me, not all games are the same. Not all adventure games are the same. And yes, that's kind of funny coming from me. I'm not a big fan of the adventure game type. Although that may be changing. I may have a video coming out soon about my changing tastes again. But in my opinion, the broad brush technique or the blanket statement technique, not only does it limit your own perception of what you're looking at, it also limits your ability to enjoy things. Now, this is kind of a funny way to put it, but I'm going to start with the first approach. It limits your perception on how you see things, right? i.e., take, for instance, looking outward in, people who look at gamers kind of look at us as kind of slacker types, people who don't really have much in the way of a goal or an aim in life because we want to just play video games all the time. And to some degree, yeah, we like to play video games. But to the other degree, it's just a hobby. It's just something we like to do. And you can look at your sports fans, your anime nuts, your big science nerds. You can look at the people who study the weather, who build model rockets, who work on cars. They're all just hobbies. But they can be turned into careers as well. So from the outside looking in, if you look at us, all of us gamers as that, slacker types, blah, 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 all the things I listed earlier, then you're going to miss a huge, vast majority of what actually goes into comprising a person. Like, I'll identify myself as a gamer. I've been gaming my whole life. Funny enough, though, when I was younger, I wouldn't call myself a gamer because I limited myself. And I figured when I was younger, I used to say that a gamer is a person who plays every type of game. Broad brush, right? But at the same time, I wouldn't call myself a gamer because I limited myself to RPG type games. But to some degree, everybody who plays games for a hobby, we'll say puts in a decent bit of effort into playing and completing video games, can easily be called a gamer. In the same notion, I will also say anyone who plays tabletops are gamers. i.e. the Dungeons and the Dragons and the Warhammers and all those fun things. And painting us all as these slacker types, not only do you miss out on the people who go out and innovate in the field, not just in video games, but in the science end, like coding and stuff like that, coding and computer graphics software updates, and just making computers more streamlined and stuff that the ideas that they get from playing these video games, like, wow, I want to do this. And when I was younger, I very much wanted to write stories for RPG games, because these were, I'm saying RPG games. It's a little bit redundant when you say RPG games. But I really wanted to write stories for these games because these were such massive worlds, and I would love to just create a world for these things, the story that fills this world. And saying that we're all slackers and lazy and all that jazz limits our perception of what a gamer actually is and what a gamer can be and the potential that lies within us. Now, granted, some of us go on to just play video games, like me. I just play video games. I didn't really take my innovation from video games and go into it. Now, admittedly, it has influenced my writing a little bit. I write a little bit JRPG style, big battles, massive monsters, and fun stuff like that. But in the same instance, my writing isn't for video games. And that same idea goes into how we perceive other games. Like, for instance, my problem of painting adventure games as just interactive movies. To a certain degree, yes. Like, first adventure game I can remember ever playing was King's Quest. I've played that one, King's Quest 4, Air Today, Gone Tomorrow, I think it was called. I've also played Monkey Island. That one was funny. But at the same time, it's like, step by step, everything's exactly the same. And once you played through it once, you can clear the game in a couple hours at best. And you know exactly everything that's going to happen. And that colored my perception of what adventure games would be from there on out. But modern day has innovated and changed the definition of what an adventure game is. Take, for instance, the games I just recently finished. Life is Strange, Before the Storm, and I'm starting up Captain Spirit. All three of those are adventure titles. But they're not just limited to what you see. You got your choices. I mean, with Before the Storm and Captain Spirit so far seem very much like the classic idea of an adventure game. You make your choices along the way, and you solve the problem, and you get to the end. Very little changes, but there are some alternate paths that you can take. With the Life is Strange story, the end is still the same, but think of it like you have your seed for your tree, and you have your end point where the tree dies. And in between there is just an intertangled web of branches and roots and everything. And yes, you're eventually going to find the same outcome. But things may be different. Perceptions from one character to another may be different. Maybe one character didn't make it to the end of the game. And Heavy Rain, I just got back into that one. I just played that one recently for the PlayStation Plus, and it got me all edgy and everything. Like, oh God, I remember everything that happens in this. But at the same time, that game does have an aspect to it that could mess you up. Your characters can die in that game. Same with like Detroit Become Human, where, I mean, I haven't seen any of it, but there is an option that says your characters can die. So I'm like, okay, so you can lose characters. And that sort of idea was not really heard of in the original type of adventure genre, where you are just the one character making your way through a series of puzzles and adventure points till you get to the end of the game. And now, I'd say my broad brush of adventure gaming is probably full of a lot of holes. And as such, it may lead us to not want to engage, say. Now I'm going to switch off of adventure genre for a moment because, well, I think I've said more than my fair share on what adventure genres mean, but for the same instance, I used to hate shooter games, just first-person shooter type games. And that was one of the series that one of the types of games I usually painted with a broad brush. Because I look at it, it's just the same. You get a gun, you shoot the bad guy's dead, blah. And true, back in the day, that's probably about what it was too. But then my first introduction to Call of Duty's story mode. Because literally before, I'd say about 4 or 5 years ago, I thought Call of Duty was just a online shooter type of game. And I'm like, there's nothing I'm going to like about that because that's just boring. And it's get in and shoot the same people over and over again. Maybe you die, maybe you don't. You can improve your skill and get a little bit better and maybe do better next time, or run into somebody who's 10 times better than you'll ever be and they'll smush you. And then my brother told me that there was a story mode, and I'm like, let me try that out. And I think it was Modern Warfare 2 that I first tried the story mode, and I loved it. I was like, oh my god, that's a deep story. I mean, I'm not even big on war story type of games, or type of stories in general, considering I'm a military man. It's kind of funny, but at the same time, I'm like, this was a really good story. And it was more than just the war, more than just shooting people. It was like betrayal and treachery and death and oh my god and what the heck and And that's why we need to avoid these types of broad brushes. I mean, if we take it back to the personal level rather than the interest level, like us gamer types, for one thing, not a single gamer you can point to is exactly like the other one. The only thing we as gamers have in common is our love of playing video games. True, we may occasionally share different interests, i.e., video games branching into stories and movies and books and other stuff like that. But in all essence, you can't just say gamers are all this, because gamers aren't all this. I mean, for one thing, I learned how to game from my mom. And by time I left home, I was better than she was. And she was pretty awesome at it, but she did a lot of the whole like strategic build into things rather than just rush in through everything. And like my sisters, they played. My brother, he plays. And all 5 of us share a common interest in video games. But between us, that is just about the only similarity that we have. And the same goes for a lot of different people, a lot of different things, which is why the whole point I wanted to talk about this was because it actually happened again in real life, where I ran into somebody who was a big fan of the blanket statement, big fan of the broad brush, as it were, and he paints the one end of something as something, and that's wrong, because nobody is ever just one thing. My whole point, I guess, about this whole video topic is that, you should never limit yourself. You should always be willing to be open to new experiences. You shouldn't say, oh, adventure games are all boring movies and they would be better served as movies, because there's still an in-depth challenge to them, i.e. you try to keep the characters alive nowadays. And to say that you don't want to play adventure games because your preconceived notions, as it were, about adventure games limits you, and you should never limit yourself to stuff like that. And that doesn't just apply to video games, obviously. I may be focusing it on video games because that's what my channel's about, but at the same time, take that idea and apply it to real life. And know that you should not just limit yourself, your experiences, to what you know and what you've preconceived. A little bit of an inspirational thing at the end there, huh? Anyway, Sorry if that was a bit rambly. I had more of a form to it when I started talking, but then it just kind of all fell apart because I kept running out of air. But anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please go ahead and poke that like button for me if you'd like to. Of course, you can comment down below, and I will get back to you as soon as I can, when I can, if I can, you know all that jazz. And tune in next time as I ramble more about other things and stuff. And until then, good night.